your neck is on the line, good luck. That's your hook. Like, you open with that. You have to do something different to grab attention, and you have to work even harder to keep that attention.
You're a great storyteller, by the way.
People are naturally drawn to stories. Nobody memorized a spreadsheet in ancient times. There's no spreadsheets on caves anywhere. It's stories. We tend to think of most events as A, B, C. That's the order they happen. But for a good story, often start with B. Then we'll go back to A to explain how we got to B, and then we'll resolve to C. That makes a much more interesting story. 70% of the buyer journey is completed before your buyer reaches out to you, the vendor. That should change your marketing focus, because now it's not about the best follow-up email, whether or not it has 10 links or not. It's about, how do I make sure my buyer learns what I want her to learn about me before I talk to her? What that means in practical terms is, what are people writing about me on Reddit? What are people writing about me on G2? What are people writing about me on Glassdoor? Which awards have I won that she might have heard of? Which conferences has she been to that I might have presented there?
It's never been as easy to sell as now, and it's never been as difficult to buy as now as buyers, right?
Udi Ledergor is the chief evangelist at Gong and the former CMO who helped turn the company into one of the most recognizable brands in B2B SaaS. During Gong's rise, he helped define the revenue intelligence category, scale the business to hundreds of millions in revenue, and build a company that reached a multi-billion-dollar valuation. He's also the author of Courageous Marketing, a book built around a simple idea. Safe marketing is forgettable marketing. Across more than 20 years in the field, Udi has built a reputation for bold positioning, strong storytelling, and marketing that actually leaves a mark.
Everyone talks about best practices in marketing, but I wanted to talk about your taste in marketing. How did you develop your marketing taste?
I think growing up in Israel, our appetite for excitement and something that grabs attention is pretty darn high. We're recording this while there's another round of violence there in the region. We won't get into the politics of it, but just to give some background, that's where I grew up. And so we're used to our attention being grabbed left and right by current events. And we need something very exciting to get us to pay attention. And I looked around when I got into B2B probably 25 years ago, and most of the marketing did not really capture my attention. It was very technical. It often looked like a technical product brochure that exploded on a screen and someone quickly turned into a TV ad or print ad. And then I looked at our friends in B2C, and they've always known how to communicate with consumers, whether it's soap commercials or car commercials or beer commercials or snack commercials. They know how to communicate with people. And I thought, well, why can't B2B be more like that? So I think that's part of what developed my taste in marketing. I never really understood why B2B defaults to boring.
So now when you want to get some inspiration or want to see what's happening, you just go and you look more for direct-to-consumer, e-commerce, B2C brand, rather than looking what the other guys are doing in B2B, right?
Yes, and I think the best inspiration often comes from outside your field. To be more precise, I think some of the most interesting things happen are when you connect two fields that are not obvious, or two things that are not obvious, and create something new that is unexpected. I look at consumer brands and I look at TV shows and I look at, there's a really cool collab between Lego and Nike, or was it Lego and Adidas? I forget, but like a shoe and a Lego brick. And that's interesting. And they created a unique shoe for lovers of both brands. Well, why don't we do more of that in B2B? Anyone who's ever watched me at a live event or podcast in my home office knows by now that I'm a big fan of Jim Henson and his Muppets, because I have a bunch of them in my home office. That inspires me. Like taking a sock puppet, which is essentially the first version of Kermit, and turning that into a cultural icon that thrives 50 years later. They just made a pilot episode for potentially a new
Reboot.
season 50 years after this started. That's wild. Like, this was a sock puppet. How did he animate it and put life into it that generations of children like me grew up on it? So I think that's when you start looking around you, just be immersed in the culture, especially of your audience, and try to create something that would look familiar enough to them so they know it's relevant, but also a unique spin on it. So like, I haven't seen that before.
Folks, if you're enjoying the interview so far, I would appreciate if you spend a second, like, comment, or subscribe to Belkins podcast on the platform where you're watching this. I'm trying to get my show listed in the best podcast, and a couple of seconds of your time would really help me a lot to do that. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the interview.
We've done a kind of competitor research, kind of, created an account and went and get calls with all the competitors, right? And the biggest observation was that all the salespeople we've been talking to, they didn't connect with us. They didn't hit it off. They were like, have like a playbook or script or something, and there was no kind of human part of it. So we went back and say, hey, the low hanging fruit for us, be it for our sales team, to be like humans, right? When you connect, when you joke, when you talk with someone, when you wanted to have a beer with someone, right? That you're not just
and the data supports that. If you've read any of the Gong Lab research, I think our first piece back in 2016 or early 2017 showed that the best salespeople, as measured by they have a higher win rate, they speak the least amount of time when talking to customers. So on an average discovery call, the salesperson should be speaking less than 46 or so percent of the time, definitely less than 50%, and let the customer do most of the talking. And if you talk to great salespeople, that's what they do. They know it's about relationship, and like any good relationship, it's usually more about listening than about talking, something I'm still working on, I'll be first to admit. But the best salespeople, they intuitively know that, and now they can also measure it, but they speak less, and they ask questions, and then they let the customer rant.
I got an email from Gong last, I think a few days ago, with like feedback after my call saying like, you need to less interrupt customers, please. Just kind of be more patient.
I just turned that off because it's so insulting.
And I sent it to my head of sales, like, okay, now I'm getting feedback as well.
Yes, I know a few people in my life who would agree with that, that I interrupt way too much.
It's very difficult to keep that kind of human part in the B2B sales process. Like, I mean, I was always trying to build a sales team around like, hey guys, just we need to connect with customers, and this is, we do it. But then over time, there was like a period when we didn't have a kind of head of sales, and now we brought someone in, a very incredible person, and he looks at the sales team and he's like, Michael, they all look like robots. Like, they're not connecting. There was like, that's why our closing rate is so low, right? And we're like, okay, what can we do? And then in a couple of weeks of just changing the tune, we say like, oh wow, our close rates are like incredibly high. Like you send most of the conversation, most of the demos into contract send stage rather than in the loss stage where like they disappeared. And it was like an eye opening for me. So even for me as a founder, that I usually, when I talk shop with or just had on a call with the customers, I don't follow the playbook. You just kind of just try to swim, right? And I still start thinking about, oh wow, like there's a lot for me to learn as well, because I sometimes jump straight into the business and action, and okay, this is how we're gonna code the contracts, and people would like to talk about the baseball and like the awards that they have on the book, right? And I was like shocked about it.
I mean, it's interesting because for most of history, sales was considered an art and a craft. And I think it's only in the last 10 to 20 years, I'll say conservatively, that people have started to understand that there's a lot of science in it as well. I'm not saying it's 100% science. Sales is not an exact science. There's still an art and a craft in it. But when Gong came on the scene 10 years ago, we started uncovering the science part of it and actually showed that, oh, we can actually measure a lot of these things. Because if you think about how salespeople were trained 20 years ago, they came in and there was some sales veteran who walked around with the bag and showed them how to do it. And this is how you should do it. Why? Don't ask questions. Just this is how we do it. And it either worked or didn't work. For the best of them, it worked because they intuitively understood what now we can measure and teach. I've hired people who went on to become some of our top sales leaders at Gong. I hired them as SDRs 8-9 years ago, and they worked up the ranks from commercial AE to enterprise AE to managing teams, and they were never salespeople before. And we were able to mold them using Gong. They're very talented, hardworking people, not taking that away, but we were able to mold people from a variety of different backgrounds, from bankers to athletes to people in all walks of life that had never sold anything before, and show them how to do it, not just by attaching them to like an apprentice model to someone who's done this, but actually showing them what they're doing that's working and what they could be doing better.
Um, I know, like, although, you have data and you can look and say, okay, here's how we could do better. Um, I know that you're not a fan of the best practices in marketing and following what others are doing. Looking back, you becoming skeptical about best practices, was it like some moment in your career, a hard-earned lesson or something like that, where you're like, okay, well, we need to do something different?
So here's the more nuanced view on best practices. Obviously, when I'm looking for a sensational title, I'll start a social post or a title by saying that best practices are shit and
Yeah.
here's what you should do instead. Like most things, real life is a little bit more nuanced than that. Now, at Gong, we have an operating principle that we call challenge conventional wisdom, which really says we're not going to deflect any best practice for the sake of being different. That would be foolish, and we would end up reinventing the wheel many times. But sometimes you just need a wheel, so use something that's already been
Right.
invented. I often give an example from everyday life. There's a best practice of when your kids get in the back seat, you buckle their seatbelts. I'm not looking to challenge that or get creative around that. I'm going to tell them to buckle their seatbelts when they get in the car. They know that by now. However, when our goal in life is not just to get through the motions of something, but to grab attention, you have to do something different because of the way our psychology works. You have to do something different to grab attention, and you have to work even harder to keep that attention. And so when you're looking to grab attention, when you look at best practices, what you often see is things that have been done over and over and over again. Those are not going to get your attention. They're just not going to grab your attention. If the first page of a newspaper were full of obituaries, it would not grab a lot of attention because people have seen those before, unless you recognize a name. That's a different story.
Right.
But you need something sensational to sell the paper, and the tabloids know this, of course. They need something so off the charts that you'll just stop and say, okay, I need to stop everything I'm doing and go read that. And in marketing, often that's what we need to do to grab attention. Again, when you're on a call, you already have someone as a captive audience. You don't need to create this excitement every 10 seconds. But when you're thinking about a commercial, when you're thinking about a billboard, when you're thinking about a piece of content, an email subject line that you want to get someone to open, it has to be exciting enough to get them to open it and hold their attention. And very often, following best practices is going to lead you in the opposite direction of something so mundane, so boring that they're not going to look at it. So it goes back to what we were saying earlier. A lot of B2B marketing, it seems like they just have these formulas and templates of this is what an ebook should look like, and this is what an email should look like. And they just all look the same. I'm sure, like me, you open up 90% of your emails and you can tell that someone used the same template to write them. Oh, there's a little personalization blurb up here, and here is the value, and here's the call to action. And it's just done in such a boring, templated way. Sometimes they even forget to replace those tokens and just says, insert personalization here. I've received those. I'm sure we all have. It makes you wonder why are people so lazy, and why do they expect to get a response when they're not putting the minimum effort into it?
Yeah. I'm against personalization. I'm for relevancy in a way. I always have this take where, like, I don't care to see in my email what kind of school I graduated, right? Or when you just found something around, like, oh, I watched the podcast with Udi and then buy my product, right? If it's not relevant, right? So you don't study my business or the where I'm at or what stage or what my problems rather like about me, right? So I'm more into kind of relevancy. However, saying that, I got an email from a Gong rep in December, and by the end of the month, I bought the software, and the email was damn good. I was like a good email, and I responded back, and it was like, let's say Chris, and say, hey Chris, if this is an automated email, I'd like to talk just because to know how you wrote it, was that damn good personalized email.
It was not. It was not automated. I haven't seen the email, but you won't be surprised by now to learn that there's a science behind this.
Yeah.
If we have 60 seconds, I'd love to go into personalization a little bit since you brought it up. We ran a study a couple of years ago now, analyzing millions of emails and the different ways that they were personalized. And we let our AI categorize it. And it turns out there's several types of personalization. One of them is the lame type that you talked about, which is a personal anecdote. Like, oh, I see you played for this golf club, or I see you went to this school. Here's a baseball cap. That's very lazy. Then there's personalization that's based on an event. Like, it was great seeing you at last week's webinar, or we met at the inbound show 2 weeks ago. So that's event based. There are a few other types. I won't bore you with all the details, but here's one really actionable takeaway that we found, which explains why a lot of these personalizations that you get seem very lame, and some of them seem like, whoa, they really like hit it out of the park. So we found that there's, amongst the many things that we found that work, one big one is this. When we're talking to senior leaders, and we define senior leaders in the B2B world as director level and above, so director, VP, C-level, talking about something personal like the school they went to does not work. Does not work. What works 3 times better is talking about a company goal that we know at their company, not something we made up. So the best salespeople use AI now to read the quarterly earnings report, go to the website to look for any strategy changes, maybe read your LinkedIn post to see if you posted this year's main goals, and they pick at least one of the main goals that the company has that we know that senior leader cares about, and we open with that. And that creates the relevance that you talked about. Because let's say you have a very specific goal, you're trying to grow your business in Eastern Europe by 34% this year. Imagine that we started with that and say, hey, given that this is your goal, here's how we can help. Is this worth 15 minutes of your time? Of course it's worth 15 minutes of your time. This is your number one goal this year. So that's what works for senior leaders. Interestingly though, for lower level, lower ranking people, usually as defined by manager and below, so mostly individual contributors, something related to their personal career advancement and goals seem to work better than company goals. And intuitively, once you read that, you understand why. Because if you're a VP at the company, you're measured by how well you help achieve the company goals. If you're a manager or a coordinator or an IC, you're trying to advance your career and you have less influence directly on the company goals. And so once you understand the science behind it, okay, Michael is a director and above, so he must represent the company goals, and he cares about that a lot more than where he went to school or where he did his swimming lessons. So let's focus on that and show how we can help him.
Yeah, that's so true. I usually call it like show me that you know me in terms of my industry or my business. So I don't, I really like when people say like, you are in appointment setting or you are in lead generation agency. So we know you and we know your struggle. Here's the pain point. I'd like to solve it. And I would be like, with my both hands on it, right? I was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's talk. It's like, I have a problem.
But it has to go deeper than the first line of your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. Of course, much deeper. Especially now with like AI, listening and scraping and everything. Like,
I see your insert title in insert industry. That's just lazy and boring.
Yeah. You're a great storyteller, by the way. So how is important storytelling in your career, and just generally how important is storytelling for CMOs as one of their key competencies?
I think I fell in love with storytelling as a child. I've told the story many times, but I was always a theater kid, not so much as an actor in productions, but a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. And I already mentioned Jim Henson and his Muppets, which I think is amazing, the way he could create life in a story around a sock puppet. If you expand that now, the Muppets are part of the Disney franchise. So you look at Disney, they're the best storytellers in the world.
Yeah.
If you watch their movies, and there've been books written about, like there's a book that a friend of mine wrote called Pixar Storytelling. It was actually really interesting about the formulas that they use for writing the best-selling movies in all times. and there's a science behind it. Again, there's lots of craftsmanship and artistry, but there's a science behind telling a story. And when I sat down to write my book, I also had to learn the key plots. And there's 7 major plots that almost every book falls into. In B2B, it's a little bit different, but if you look at all the best novels, they fall into one of 7 plots. It's like either a journey of self-discovery or a love story that seems unlikely, and then some big mess happens, and in the end, everyone is together and happy end. And once you kind of see that, you can't unsee that, and it kind of ruins a lot of things for you, because when you start looking at books or watching a movie,
Easy structure.
yeah, by page 50, I'm like, okay, I know where this is going. Like, this is you don't know all the plots and turns on the way, but you kind of know how it's going to end by then. Like, oh, they're never going to kill this character because they're part of the big resolution at the end. So I fell in love with storytelling by reading a lot of books and watching TV shows and movies. And it goes back to the attention grabbing that we talked about earlier. People are naturally drawn to stories. You look at the first elements of how tribal knowledge was passed on from one generation to another. It was with stories.
Yeah.
Nobody memorized the spreadsheet in ancient times. There's no spreadsheets on caves anywhere. It's stories about animals, about immigration, about how things came to be. Look at the Just So stories. It's all these really interesting stories that have a teaching in them, and we tend to remember stories more than we remember spreadsheets or product specs, which is still surprising. Like you said, a lot of salespeople, they start with, oh, here are the specs of our product. And who's going to remember that? Tell a story and show how, if you can make your audience the hero of the story, you're already winning. And every salesperson knows this. If you can show your audience how they become the hero of the story, whether they're an individual contributor, like, hey, if you let me help you with this project, you will become the hero of your department. Or if you're a C-level exec, if you let me help you, like, you're going to help hit your company's goal. You're the one who's going to get all the credit. So you understand that the story is about the audience, and that grabs their attention and keeps their attention. So I just think it's the most effective form of communication if you think about storytelling. There's that old Sunscreen song with the line that says, never read beauty magazines because they'll only make you feel ugly. That's how I felt when I was writing my book. And I read a lot of books about writing books. Yeah. And with every chapter of every book about writing, I felt I was a worse and worse writer because, I don't use those strong verbs and examples. And I don't use that beautiful way of theming together all these different chapters. But I got a little bit better at just being aware of them, and then suddenly looking at my writing and saying, okay, that's way too long a sentence. And instead of using a verb and 3 qualifiers and adverbs around it, I could just use one strong verb instead. So I think learning the techniques of good storytelling, there's so many TED Talks out there and YouTube videos, and Nancy Duarte has a great TED Talk about some of the best talks in the world, from Steve Jobs' announcement of the iPhone to Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream. She analyzed them and found the same patterns in them, which is not so surprising because they're really strong, memorable human stories. One about technology, one about a civil rights movement, but you get the point. I think that's one of the best skills that I'm trying to teach to my kids, and I think we all need to do that as part of mentoring or coaching or parenting, to teach people to tell a good story and to teach people to listen. Maybe that's something I still need to work on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like in music, right? I know you're also into music. So it's like there's a structure to it, right? Like always. And it's like sometimes our brain, because we've seen those stories over a long period of time, and we kind of sometimes expect it. So when brain doesn't get it, it becomes annoyed in a way, right? And it's like, okay, something is not working here. Like it's not. But when you get it right, then you like have a nice complete piece and you have the relaxation. So your brain doesn't produce more energy to digest that type of piece of information. It's more like flawless, and you're like, okay, nice.
Yes.
It's like with a good call, when you have like where this is all going, what you can be discussing, but very nicely executed. Even if you're aware, you have a satisfaction of a great professionalism, and a great they put time on this, they put a thought on that. It's great, right?
Yeah, a great example of that in storytelling is anyone who posts on social media or does any sort of writing knows this, that we're always looking for a hook, Like,
Mhm.
what can we begin with that will draw people
Yeah.
in? And I was taught to do that for every chapter and every story in the book. And sometimes I sat down, as most people I think do, and kind of write down the story chronologically of this
Mhm.
is how it happened.
Mhm.
But when you describe things chronologically, often the beginning is very boring because
Right.
it's what we call the exposition. You're just
Right.
setting it up. Like,
Yeah.
we're in London, we're in a room, there's lighting, there's cameras. That's really boring. And then one of the first chapters in my book, I wrote the story about my Super Bowl commercial in 2021. And when my editor saw the story, he said, "Look, you have all the ingredients here, but your hook is buried in the middle." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, on page 4, there's an email you got from your CEO after a long, winding story. And the email read one line. It said, 'Udi, basically your neck is on the line. Good luck.'" He
Mhm.
said, "That's your hook. Like, you open with that." Now, that's very counterintuitive because it's in the middle of the story, but you don't understand how I got there. He said, "Exactly. That's why people are going to want to read next." That's exactly what you were saying. You're now uncomfortable because you're unsatisfied
Mhm.
in a good way, in a way that makes you lean in. I want to understand how we ended up with that email that's saying
Right.
my neck is on the
Yeah.
line.
You become
So,
curious.
so chapter 1 opens with that line. "Udi, your neck is on the line. Good luck." Read the one-line email from my CEO, true email. And then I break it down. So
Mhm.
if you think about the chronology, we tend to think of most events as A, B, C. That's the order they happen. But for a good story, often we'll start with B, then we'll go back to A to explain how we got to B, and then we'll resolve to C. That makes a much more interesting story.
Do you think you become a better marketer after you wrote a book and published it and went more into kind of even better into storytelling?
I think parts of some of my marketing skills became better for sure, around storytelling. I think my social posts are better now, for the most part, when I take the time to sit down and write them properly. Um, there are many other parts of marketing. Marketing is a lot more than storytelling, and
Mhm.
I saw this as I evolved the Gong marketing team from a team of 1, which was me, to a team of about 60 when I transitioned to my current role 3 years ago. The focus that was required of me changed a lot over the years. So in the early days, it was a lot about these stunts, and if we just figured out, how to get some cheap media for a Super Bowl commercial or get a billboard in Times Square and use the creative in a really novel way, that would be enough to fill the pipeline for a quarter. At the volumes that Gong operates now, and any company as it grows, that's not enough. You can't rely on these heroics. And it's a lot about managing a team and making sure they're all aligned on the same goals. And managing a campaign when 60 people is involved is a bit of a nightmare compared to 3 or 5 or 10 people, where we all sat around the same desk pod, and we were coordinator, and we were, just talking over our shoulders like, "Hey, have you done that? Yeah, have you done that?" It's done. So the focus of the work changes a lot as
Mhm.
the team grows, and it includes a lot of this quote unquote boring stuff now of coordinating and aligning. And there are people now that their whole roles are like chief of staff and campaign manager, all this stuff. It's not my passion
It's not
area.
for you.
It's not my passion area. Um, I did it because I had to, but if I look back to how my team evolved and which parts I enjoyed most, I think we did what I considered our best work and that I enjoyed most in the earlier days when it was a small team. When if we did these heroics often enough, we got the results that everyone was happy with, and we just had the fun of thinking them up and not having to deal with too many spreadsheets and coordination and alignment efforts.
When do you know that a marketing idea has an edge compared to it's we're just trying too hard?
First, it's impossible to know before you run it. It's
Mhm.
impossible because if it were possible, then every campaign by brands who have the resources to invest in it and figure this out, every campaign would be a winner. And there is no brand in the world that has figured this out. I mean, look at the best brands, whatever they are that you look up to, they've all had duds. The graveyards are full of campaigns that people had a lot of hopes for and just didn't work from even biggest brands who can do the most market research and have all the resources to the best creative agencies. Most Super Bowl commercials, right, which is arguably the most expensive medium in the world,
Yeah.
they suck. Most of them, like, you won't even remember. There's dozens of them every year, and you don't remember most of them. So I never know. And I think there's enough data from different fields to tell us that going for perfection is counterproductive to get it compared to getting more at bats. Daniel Pink wrote a lot about this. So he quotes this famous study where two groups of people were put in a pottery studio where they make pottery. And one group was told, you have 1 hour to create one pot, but make it as perfect as you can.
Mm-hmm.
The other group also got 1 hour, but they were told, make as many pots as you can.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the experiment, they had professional pottery artists, I guess, if that's what they're called, look at the pots created by both groups. Which one do you think created the better pots?
The second group.
The second group created the better pots because they had more at-bats.
Yeah.
They were not worried the whole hour that this has to be the most perfect pot I've ever made in my life, which is what happened to the first group. So they ended up with one pot each, which was decent because they put a lot of attention to it. But the second group, some of them made 3, 4, 5, 8 pots. By the 8th one, guess what? They naturally got better at it. Anyone who's ever tried a hobby like cooking or playing an instrument knows that that's the situation. Like, if you give me a Bach prelude and you say you have 1 hour played once as best as you can, I'm going to play it very, very, very slowly, and I'm going to make mistakes, still going to make some mistakes in it. But if you give me an hour to practice any way I like, I'm probably going to break it down and going to get through the easy parts easily and stop practicing them because they're easy. I'm going to practice the hard parts 20 times until I crack them, and then I'm going to start connecting them together. By the end, I'll probably make a better performance of it than if I only played it once as best as I can. So getting more at-bats, which goes back, sorry, I know I strayed from your original question on on marketing creativity, but you need more at-bats. So even the best marketers know that a lot of their experiments are not going to succeed. That's why they're called experiments. They're not called just running it. You need to create a culture where people feel safe to fail. If you want to succeed and have really creative standout results and campaigns and people willing to take risks, you have to create the psychological safety that allows them to fail safely. I know that sounds like this whole new age American thing, but it's very, very true.
That's true.
A lot of teams, they don't have that environment, and people feel that they need to succeed in everything they do, or their job is on the line, or they won't get that promotion. Now, if you're constantly failing for years and not having successes, you probably should be worried about your job or that promotion. But the best people who earn those promotions, it's not just because they followed the book. It's usually because they had outsized results. They took a risk that paid off. And it's usually, it doesn't happen on the first or single risk that you take. You've got to take a lot of risks. Some of them are not going to turn out well. Now, you have to have good judgment because you don't want to take risks that are going to bring the company down, right? If something you do is going to cause a security breach or a PR disaster, then you might lose your job. So you need some guardrails around that. But within those guardrails, there's so much that we can do and so much risk that we can take and experiments we can run that most teams still don't do. But when you do, that's when you get those gems. 1 out of those 20 or 1 out of 100 campaigns that shines is worth all the work and all the experimentation that got you there. So do I know in advance it's going to work? Never. But the reason that several of them did work is because we ran a lot of them. A lot of them.
I was owning my marketing team and managing the team for a while. And as a founder, and it brings me to the story about the pottery. Me and my wife went to do the pottery, and I within an hour, 2 hours, I broke probably like 50 pots. Basically, I was just on it, and it's like I need to figure out how I do that quickly. I wasn't kind of patient enough, and at the end, I didn't make any pottery. And she spent like X number of minutes, but she made a good one, you know. And then I went back and said, okay, this is probably talks to the personality, right? Like I need to to get my hands dirty for like a lot of tries to get to the point when I become comfortable to then spend more time on it, right? And that's just more entrepreneurial thing. But that was an approach that I had with my marketing team, and the kind of the whole anxiety that they always had with me, you know, because I was providing the pressure and just a lot of tries. And at some point in time, I remember I hired CMO, and she said, "Listen, Michael, let's just leave the marketing team alone. Let them figure it out." And to my great surprise, they actually figured it out. They somehow created their own internal structure, their internal movement, their own speed, their own way. And because of that, they didn't follow the KPIs and the speed of the other departments of the company. They were different from sales, they were different from delivery. But within their own world, they start producing a pretty darn good ideas that led to a few really good campaigns, right? Now, great thing is that a lot of those campaigns worked. The bad thing was that they became sort of out of touch in a way, you know, that it was very difficult then to do anything with them because they became a little bit rigid in their own way, because they are like, they knew that they're successful in the way they operate, but if you try to move them and say, okay guys, we also need to operate a little bit differently, they were more uncomfortable about it, you know. So
That reminds me of a chapter in Adam Grant's book, Think Again. He analyzes performance at an individual level, at team level, at company levels. And there's a really interesting chapter on team performance where he brings examples from high performing teams at organizations like NASA, where arguably there's very little room for error.
yes.
But they actually give them a lot of freedom
Mhm.
for experimentation. It's NASA, right? I mean, they're breaking new ground every single day. Like nobody's ever done what they've done before. They can't follow any best practices. There is no bigger
Right.
space agency in the world. So they needed to create that psychological safety of experimenting and researching and finding creative solutions. And anyone who's watched Apollo 13 or other movies know that those are some of the most creative people in the world. Which brings up the question that you raised, but then how do we align them to what the organization needs to achieve? If we just let them be artists all day and go do their thing, how do we know that they're still helping us achieve the organizational goals? And so what Adam Grant found is that creating that psychological safety opens up all the creative chakras and lets people fail safely and run all these experiments. But it works best when it's coupled with what he called process accountability, which sounds very boring, but here's the very simple concept that it masks. Process accountability is making sure that all these experiments are designed knowing that in their best case scenario, they will serve the goals that the team and the company are trying to achieve. Here's an example for marketing, if that sounds too out there. We have $1 million of pipeline to create this quarter. That is the goal. Now go come up with all your best creative ideas. Just tell me a story that in the best case scenario, your campaign idea will help us get closer to the $1 million of pipeline. That's all I'm asking. So if you're saying, let's put up a spaceship, literally going to space and film a commercial, which a company called Paddle here in the UK did. Their CMO did a great job with that. But it created pipeline. He showed me how he measured the ABM results of that campaign. He literally worked with the university in Oxford to put up a little spaceship in outer space with an app running their product, and they customized it in space to create like 30 different ABM videos. It's a wild idea, and he knows exactly how much pipeline and business came out of it. That is the perfect way of doing this. Like giving all the creative freedom. So he didn't know if it would work. And in fact, he hated the first version that came out. He scrapped it. He started again because it was so bad. It did not meet his standards. So he kept experimenting, but he knew that in the best case scenario, this is going to create 30 ABM videos. Each one of them is, say, $1 million account. This is going to help us hit our pipeline goal. And he did. And so when you describe the marketing team that kind of went astray and was happy and creative within, maybe what they were missing was a little bit of process accountability of like, okay, if most marketing teams, and I'm a big believer of this, their goal should be make sales easier.
Right.
And everything we do should demonstrate how we make sales easier. Maybe that's the missing link to add to their creativity and psychological safety. And you said they were happy and experimenting and doing all these trials, but how does that contribute to making sales easier? Once you manage to link these two things, then magic happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I might have missed the second part, especially now when I read this book by the authors of the Challenger sales, the frame making sales. They just published it a few months ago, and the whole kind of spiel of the book was that it's never been as easy to sell as now, and it's never been as difficult to buy as now as buyers, right? And that stuck with me. I was like, okay, that actually makes sense, because like even in marketing, I'm trying to overcomplicate with like, let's create more white papers. Let's just create more comprehensive blog coverages, more research. Let's just, send a follow up to a client with like 10 links. And then after getting this punchline, I was like, what I'm doing with with everything. Like I'm probably like at 100 other companies where buyers are shopping for something doing that, instead of just sending one nice email with a good story, personalizing, or like, going from, this is what we've discussed, this is what we uncovered, this is how we wanted to do this, yada, yada, yada. And then just be more memorable in that way, so that someone who read this, like, oh yeah, I remember the conversation with Michael, rather like, I remember 100 links that Michael sent.
I think there's a bigger picture to that, which is there's a 15-year-old Forrester stat that's been wildly circulated and abused at this point, which is 70% of the buyer journey is completed before your buyer reaches out to you, the vendor. And in Gong research, we found last year evidence that that number is actually closer to 85% today. Now, once you understand that, understand that your buyer is doing 85% of her research before she reaches out to a vendor of choice, that should change your marketing focus. Because now it's not about the best follow-up email, whether or not it has 10 links or not. It's about, how do I make sure my buyer learns what I want her to learn about me before I talk to her? What that means in practical terms is, what are people writing about me on Reddit? What are people writing about me on G2? What are people writing about me on Glassdoor? Which awards have I won that she might have heard of? Which conferences has she been to that I might have presented there?
Triggers.
So you need to understand this, the way I like to think about it, for years, us marketers were taught that there's a marketing funnel, but that was completely made up. There's no buyer in the history of buying who said, oh yes, I got your awareness paper and then I read the decision paper and then I finally decided to come to you. That doesn't work that way. More than a funnel, marketing is a tornado or a hurricane that engulfs our buyers. And you want to make sure that at all those different touch points, which are not going to show up on a neat dashboard, I'll tell you now, they're not going to show up on a neat dashboard, they get everything they need, so that when they finally get to the eye of the storm, when they finally are ready to talk to you, they have 85% of what they need. And so they probably don't need the 10 links from you unless they ask, like, here's the 10 things I need you to send me. I don't think I would send them 10 links. They probably just need one or two things to help them justify this internally, because they've already done their research. And so if you look at the best brands today, and the transition from SCO to GEO or AEO is also highlighting this need, because people are losing a lot of traffic, right? We've all seen that websites like HubSpot have lost maybe 40% of their traffic in the last couple of years, because the search engines are not sending the traffic the way they used to, because people are getting the answers that they want now directly on the search engine. Now, if you know that, and I think that's just a microcosmos of the buying journey in its entirety, you need to make sure that what you're trying to teach doesn't happen on that discovery call, which very few people, relatively speaking, get to, that it's already out there, that you have customers speaking on your behalf, you have partners speaking on your behalf, third-party reviews and credibility with industry analysts like Forrester and Gartner and G2 and others. Like, they're all saying what you would have said if you had that meeting, because that's where people are really looking at right now. That's the top of that hurricane or funnel.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you cannot do it overnight, right? You need to do consistently over the years. Like, when you were telling this, I was like trying to relate to my journey in my marketing, right? And that's exactly what we've been doing all the time. You were like, hey, how other companies like G2, and for us it's Clutch and others, are talking about us, how we are everywhere. Like, how do we create this kind of image of our brand across the board that will be telling the story, right? So creating the perception, so when customers talk to us, they already are familiar with us. This kind of feeling of familiarity and the closeness in a way that, you know, you want to do business with them, something that's just remembrance, right? In a way. And it's very difficult to achieve that in our professional services lead generation, because like there's like hundreds of agencies that always do the same, right? And it even starts with like a name. You know, when we were creating the name of my company, Belkins, which is like it's a weird name for a lead generation company, and we had a square logo in the past, and strange colors. But the point was, most of the companies were Leadware, Leadberry, Lead Magnet, whatever, Deal, you know, and we were like Belkins basically, right? And I remember like 10 years ago, I was like, okay, this is the stupidest name for a lead generation company. But then over time, when you start adding, you know, the emotion, the colors, the perception, something, and then people look and say like, oh wow, we like the websites, the visual, the messaging, how people are talking about that, how we perceive the brands. And that was like over time gives you this powerful instrument of like just building the trust in a way, and then that trust converts into a just a pipeline. And you're right, it's like a hurricane. You never, you just try to be at all of those places and trying to consolidate and align, so that especially in the time of AI, you don't want, you know, Clutch and G2 on your website and your social talk different language, because like everyone will be confused, right? So as soon as you align that messaging across the board and control it in a way, but do that and not just aggregate your traffic on several campaigns on your website and thinking that, oh, now I'll be blowing up. Then
Right. So two quick thoughts on that. One, it reminds me of this joke I think I saw on an old TV show where they said, no VIP has ever used a service that has VIP in its name, which is true if you think about it. So I actually think Belkins is, even though it doesn't mean anything immediately to an average person like me, it sounds more elite than Lead Magnet or Lead something. And I think once those companies expand their offering, that they'll have to rethink the name, like so many companies
Yeah.
in our space. You know, there was a company called Outreach, because they started by creating software for outreach. Now they're trying to do more, but that's the one thing they're known for. And unless they change their name, they're probably going to be stuck in that
always
perception
an
forever.
outreach, yeah.
Gong was always an evocative name. Of those who are in sales know that many sales teams celebrate by hitting a gong on the
Yeah.
sales floor when deals are won. So
Mm.
this helps sales succeed, but there's so many things that sales need to succeed. And we can continue adding products as we do every year,
Yeah.
but still keep the name, and it's just as relevant as ever. The second thing though, to go back to the struggles of how it takes a while to build that inbound swell of people reading your reviews on different sites and so on. I want to make sure I was understood correctly when I said you need to build that, because that's how most buyers live out their journey. I'm not saying if you start a business, just sit back and wait for those reviews to create, or try driving them, because it could take years to build that inbound swell. When I came to Gong, I was their employee number 13 and marketer number 1. It was very early days. We had 0 inbound, like
Right.
nobody had heard about us. We had 11 paying customers and nobody heard about us. And so I split my efforts into both aggressive outbound for short-term results, because that's what you have to do when nobody's heard about you. At the same time, working hard with content marketing and other brand building activities to create that inbound, so that in a few years, I went from 0 to 40% of my revenue and pipeline was created inbound. If I didn't start those long-term efforts on day one, I would not have achieved them after 3, 4, 5 years. If I had done only that, we'd be out of business after a couple of years, because we'd be out of money just spending on those investments that take years to mature. So we needed the short-term revenue that came from outbound activities. So for most enterprise sales motions, those are the two things you need to balance from day one. You need outbound for now and inbound to make it easier tomorrow.
Yeah, and even circling back to what you mentioned around making mistakes. Like you cannot build an inbound engine that works without making a ton of mistakes. Like in my personal example, we did content marketing early on, and I was spending a lot for years only getting the page views, right? No deals. Had to rebuild the marketing team somewhere like 5-6 years in the journey of doing that, consistently investing. And the new lead came in and said, hey, Michael, you know what? We need to probably cut down 70% of the content, and the remaining 40 we need to rewrite, because like if you remove Belkins name from the content and put another company name, it's the same content. You cannot tell whether it's a Belkins or any other. It's like an entry company. There's there are Belkins there. So, and we start. I've made this exercise in 2021 before like LLMs and before the traffic went down. So I did this exercise, but that was hard. Like imagine going back and say like, hey, we spent probably several $1 million, and at that time for us was like huge budget, right? Over the years, and we need to cut down 80% of the content, and just we need to rebuild everything, write every article, because like, and we've done that. It was a hard thing to swallow, but after we've done that and we've learned how to do it right, when AI LLMs start popping up, now our traffic is growing because we don't have an SEO content or clicks. We have a more unique, authentic information to answer the questions.
That builds authority.
That builds authority. And then you become an authority source overnight. And then now your LLM is growing, your competitors are here. And then just kind of, because you went down to the foundation and say, okay, well, no one reads our content. We even don't read our blog. Just let's start reading with it, right? Like, and this is not true. This is like, this copywriter wrote it. No one talks like that, right? So, but that was my kind of graveyard, right? That I paid for. I know, like, obviously, everyone who saw you speaking and know Gongs and the successful campaigns you run. Can you give me a few examples of the graveyards that you have that are like you are embarrassed for, or like that I mean, that was a very thin ice for you to. Is there any?
Yeah, of course. There's many. Thankfully, they're probably hard to find on the web today, but there's many of them. I think one example that comes to mind was about 5 years ago when we were already a decently big company doing business with larger and larger enterprises. I mean, today, 5 out of the Fortune 10 companies use Gong, so the biggest companies in the world. But back then, we were already in larger enterprise, and I was still producing some commercials and video content that were kind of, TikTok was just coming on the world stage, and we wanted something fun to speak to the younger generation. And my chief revenue officer said, Udi, I'm not sure that serves us anymore the way it did 3 years ago, because our customer profile was now more enterprisey, and our company was bigger and more robust and better known. And I think I let that slip from me for a little bit too long, and I was still creating some materials that looked very startup-y, as in we're desperate for attention, which cheesy. Every startup is. And there's nothing to be ashamed about that. But at that point, I think we needed something a little more buttoned up, a little more, I guess, self-respecting, that I probably should have done a bit sooner. So there's definitely some of the last kind of video commercials and stuff that I created. They probably belong to an earlier era of Gong.
Well, we had, I think like 4 years ago, maybe we had a chief meme officer, like the position, and several people in the team, some on freelance, some like they were just creating the TikTok, shorts and memes, and it was bad. Like I watched them now. I was like, oh, who does that? But to my great surprise, they built our recruitment pipeline. So it didn't get any customers, but people were recruiting us like, oh, I watched your TikTok.
Do that,
like, like I like your style of humor, whatever. And I was like, who watches that, right? Like, but we stopped over time because, again, to your point, like we became more mature, and it's just not a good investment at that time, So
right,
yeah. Is there any kind of B2B marketing advice that comes to your mind that is rather actively harmful right now? That
B2B advice that is harmful.
Yeah, that you hear a lot, or see a lot out there.
I think one assumption that I know I had, and I know a lot of marketers have, is assuming that some of their well-established competitors or neighbors in the space have figured out things because they're bigger and have been around for longer and have more resources. And so we tend to look at what our competitors are doing on their website, how they changed their messaging, which colors they chose, and just assume that, oh, they've already tested this and this is what works. So let's just use those elements. And I would caution against that. That is often, it can lead you down a wrong path. First of all, why would you assume that your competitors are smarter than you? That's a terrible assumption. I'm not saying be cocky about everything, and I've erred on that side too, but the world has been changed by people no smarter than you and me. And if you remember that, something fresh that we came up with, just because it hasn't been done does not mean it's not a good idea. It just means it hasn't been done. That's literally what it means. Everything around us was done for the first time at some point, by people no smarter than you and me. So we can all create new stuff. And I often tell the story when we created Gong's first intentional website back in 2018 or 2019. We looked around all the B2B websites, starting with those in our space, but moving along other broader B2B websites. And they all used what one of my team members called Series A blues. They all had these very similar blue hues that paired beautifully with whites and grays and just looked very unoffensive. Like they're very agreeable, but they all looked the same and they were very boring. Now, how did that came to be? Because many marketers looked around us. They said, oh, everyone's doing these blue, white, and gray. That must be what's working for everyone. That must be what customers expect.
Right.
Let's do a blue, white, and gray website. And so yet another one became blue, white, and gray. When I looked at that, I said, okay, that's what everyone's doing. So I need to do something else. Now, what's the opposite of that? And then we came up with bright pink and purple and bulldog and all that crazy stuff. And it worked. And we got a lot of attention, more than any other neighbor in our space that were much bigger than us by then. So I think just sometimes reminding yourself that you're as smart and as creative as anyone else in the space. And just because they've been around for longer and they're doing something a certain way does not mean that that's the best thing for you to do. Oftentimes it means you should do the opposite.
And often there is a timing for an idea, and some ideas are just way out of the future in a way. My co-founder always comes up with some ideas that I am more realist, more conservative in a way. So when I look at those ideas, I was like, there's no way we can do it right now, or like there's other things that we can work on right now. And what's happening, especially when you need to pivot or rebuild the company or whatever, and what's happening in 3 years, I say, you know what, now the timing is right. And he's like, I told you we need to do that, right? And it's like, yeah, because the timing wasn't the right one for that idea. Do you have any anything that comes to your mind where like you remember there was some ideas that, or some campaigns that you were like, okay, we need to run that, but you didn't do that, but then in several years you had to run it, and that the timing was there. So you kind of looked into the future a little bit with regards to, but didn't take the jump.
I think one example of that at Gong is our first customer event, which I waited about 3 years before doing. And every year my CEO and others came to me and said, are we doing customer event this year? I said, I don't think we're ready. I'm afraid that we won't be able to fill a room. We only had, I don't know, a few dozen customers, 100 customers. Like, how are we going to fill a room? There's nothing sadder than renting a big space and then nobody showing up. And you end up starting to
but you can then post now and say, listen, it's empty, and then it's going to go trending, right?
I know. It would be terrible. So I finally pulled off our customer event in 2019, which was a huge success. And I probably could have done it a year or two earlier and started gaining the learnings from that. We probably could have gotten a few more under our belt before COVID, because we did that big event in October of 2019, and then 3 months later COVID started and we had to go virtual for a couple of years like everyone. So I probably could have done that earlier. I will say, fortune favors speed. So you have to move fast. And we've looked into this many times at Gong at different decision-making frameworks. And one thing that we follow a lot, we didn't make this up, but we follow a lot, is quickly doing a triage of decisions into reversible and irreversible decisions. If it's a irreversible decision, then it's definitely worth taking our time, collecting all the relevant information, getting all the feedback from all the relevant people, and making a careful, deliberate decision. There are very few decisions that fall in that bucket. Very few. 95% of the decisions we make, if not more, are reversible decisions. Another way of thinking of them is a revolving door. Like we go through the door. If we don't like what's on the other side, we go right back, come out on another side. And so if you think about most campaigns, like where are you going to put in your LinkedIn ad copy? That's a reversible decision. Like unless you're writing something so horrible that you're going to get sued for it, it's probably a reversible decision. You launch it, you wait a week. If it didn't work, you pull it down, you put something else. But if instead you're waiting 3 months to get that perfect copy, you just lost all the market intel you could have gathered in those 3 months. You lost the leads you could have gotten, and all the learnings. So once you realize that most of life's decisions, it's not just at work, by the way, it's at home as well. Like, what are we going to get for dinner? I know people who get analysis paralysis from trying to decide what to have for dinner. Like, I don't. It's just food. Like, let's have dinner.
The first thing,
We'll have noodles today. We'll have chicken tomorrow. Like, who cares? Most of life's decisions are reversible. When you understand that, it allows you to move faster with less anxiety because you know, hey, if this doesn't work out, we'll just roll it back. Again, some decisions like a major hiring decision, those are big decisions. Technically, they're reversible, right? Other than death, everything is reversible if you go to the extreme. But there are decisions that are very hard to reverse, like making a major hire. So we want to be very careful about that and getting all the references and all the relevant people to interview them. But then there are other decisions that are just reversible. Like pick a color for your website, pick a booth at the trade show, just do it. It'll be fine.
One of the biggest, I see mistakes that a lot of my customers are doing early on when we start the relationship with them is that they're so buttoned down on how do we do the messaging? How do we do this? How do we do that? And just really spending so much time on all of that. Then, as you said yourself, like you're not opening many doors in between that time to be able to actually find the approach that works. And I always say to them, listen, we probably, the ideal client profile or the messaging we're using right now, probably in 3-4 months, we're going to be way doing something different. So the question is, how do we shorten the time from us to get from where we are right now to actually finding the angle that works and the messaging and differentiation and something like that? And the companies that realize that and they are trying to move faster usually end up in a much better position. But if they start by default with say, okay, this is our ICP, this is the only people we want to talk to, this is how we want to position ourselves, and we're just rigid about it, very often you move slower and it just takes so much time to get. So eventually you still need to change it, but it's just, instead of taking a few months, it's going to take you a year. And companies don't want to wait a year, right? So that kind of cultural change, I think it's very important. That's why, now when I'm trying to kind of position my company, my offering, I always say, hey, let's spend a couple of few months, like 1, 2, 3 months, just really moving quickly and R&Ding in and just kind of really finding it, because you don't have data. You never done that before, right? You think that chief sustainability officer is your ideal client profile? Maybe not, right? Like, so
within guardrails, I would say,
right.
because I've also worked with appointment setting agencies, and sometimes they bring people that are clearly not in
right.
my ICP, and that's a waste of time and money. So within certain guardrails, like yes, within a sales team is going to be the RevOps buyer or the sales enablement team or the sales executives. I don't know, but it's not going to be the HR or finance person.
Yeah.
So
and I think like to the point that you just mentioned, like that, sometimes agencies can be way off the radar. I saw something that I really liked when you spoke about the agency that was doing your website, and the fact that only by working with them very closely, you were able to maximize the output that you received, right? So they wouldn't done the branding on the website the way they did if you were not very actively involved into that, right? And I think that's something that's happening very often when you bring on a partner and you just let them be. It's like, well, this is their job. Well, let them do that, right? They might end up it's somewhere very far away from where you want them because you didn't have a very tight kind of connection, right? So
yeah, the way I look at it, people often ask me about early hires, and I've heard from marketers I respect that said that their first hire would be a graphic designer because it just helps them move so fast with other things. I respect what they're doing. If it works for them, great. But then people are surprised when I told them the first graphic designer I hired at Gong was after we were well past 100 million in ARR. People go, what? Yeah, and that was when I hired my first full-time PR person as well. We were past 100 million ARR. And I'm seeing founders and CMOs that are less than 10 million struggling to understand whether they need a PR person or a graphic designer.
Yeah, I'm one of them. Yeah.
Okay, so here's how I think of it, and maybe this is helpful to you or other people. I like to think about what's a core capability that I need on my team. If that is core, I should start working and developing it very early. If it is not core, I need a very strong justification to bring it in until much, much later. So here are practical examples. At Gong, from day one, I knew that our core is going to be our content, because I had built content marketing as the backbone of demand gen strategies at several companies before. I knew that I need really strong, unique content that nobody's built before. The only way to do that is to build that capability in-house. If I outsource to a content agency that's working on 6 different brands in different spaces, I'm going to get very fluffy, generic content that nobody's going to want to read. So my first hire was a content creator to create that content. And very quickly, we established the best content practice in our industry. However, graphic design, I had a freelancer in Romania for about 5 years that we used to send work to. And when we got back in the morning, because we worked in the US, his time are opposite, the work was ready. It was convenient. Did it win any design awards? No. Was it good enough? Yes. Now, if you're a brand like Apple that hired Johnny Ives early on because design was at the core of what they do, I totally get and respect that. And oh my God, they have the most beautiful products in the world because that was a core competency. At Gong, we have great looking products. They're not winning any design competitions, and specifically marketing, right? We do put a lot of work in our UX, so it probably could and should win design competitions, but marketing assets, no. It had to be consistent and look like it came from Gong. So we have our style guides of these are the colors and these are the fonts and these are the icons and these are the photos you can use. But anything you do within that, even if you stray a little bit left or right, it'll look like Gong. It's good enough. We cared about the content itself, what's written in it, more than the design. So why would I hire a designer and worry about her IT and laptop and seating space and days off of work and team meetings and weekly one-on-ones? That's like thousands of hours and resources wasted on something that my freelancer did almost as well as anyone would have done in-house. So that's how I think about that. Do you need this to be core? Do you need a learning curve? Arguably, if social media is a huge channel for you, you need someone internal doing social media that get really, really good at it in a way that's uniquely yours. If you're just doing social media to keep the lights on, you can get an agency to do that for you. Why would you waste time on having someone do that in-house with all the headache that comes with it? Product marketing, for most companies, that's a core competency. So you need that in-house. I probably brought it in way too late at Gong, but for different reasons. But that's a core competency. But things like PR, things like graphic design, for me, they never were core. So for many, many years, I worked with agencies and freelancers, and we did pretty well.
This core channel, so profound. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So when I posted a few weeks ago about the fact that there's a lot of kind of anxiety in the marketing space and people are figuring out what the hell is happening. Google search engine is going down. Like you don't know, like, do I need to double down on ads or something? Social media, whatever, right? So and then again, the world is going to shit, right? Like wars everywhere, like this, the economy, the stock, like everything, right? And marketing feels that a lot. Like personally, because again, I've been around not that long ago. I would say like this is my maybe second market cycle or downturn cycle, something like that. So you've been around for many more downturns. Like
that's a very kind way of calling me old. Yeah.
I mean, obviously you've been running the marketing teams, I probably would have been in school at that time. But
if you ask my kids, they'll tell you that my first pet was a T-Rex. So yeah, I've been around for a while.
So this particular downturn, this this crisis we are right now, is it particularly bad? How is it different from the others? And would you say that now it's more difficult to be in marketing than before because of the the AI disruption, or it's more privileged and more easier? And the feeling that you have, in your bones right now with regards to this specific downturn is, we're fine.
I don't think it's harder now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Like you said, I've been in this field for over 25 years. I was in the workforce during the dot-com bubble burst of the year 2000. Funnily enough, with the same CEO I have today, Amit Bendov. We were working together 28 years ago already. And we were not teenagers back then either. So we've seen a lot of these cycles. We've seen the dot-com bubble burst. We've seen the 2008, 2009 subprime collapse. We've seen COVID. We've seen the 2023 economy downturn, and both our home countries are currently at war, which seems to be a regular cycle by now. So these things always come and go. What's helped us at Gong and what's helped me personally, which is easier said than done, I'll be the first to admit, is to try and separate what we can control and what we cannot control. Because the paralysis and analysis and anxiety come mostly from the things that we cannot control. Control gives us a lot of calm, actually. Now, for control freaks like me, I often err on the side of assuming I can control more than I can actually control, or at least want to control more than I can actually control. I find that a lot of people, they don't even separate those two things very well, and they get into a lot of anxiety and worry, which is a natural response to things they cannot control. Like, when will the war in Ukraine or the war in Israel be over? I don't know. I don't know. I do know that there's very little I can do about it. There's very, very little I can do about it. And so, other than checking on my family and relatives and friends there and being polite and asking if there's anything I can do, I know they're going to say no because there's really nothing I can do. I focus on what I can control. And by doing that, we regain a sense of agency of, oh, okay, what we do actually matters, right? Because I'm a very small believer in thoughts and prayers. I don't think they work. And if it works for some people, great. For me, it doesn't work, okay? And I'm not a believer in it. So I'm biased towards action. And I find that taking action, going back to the revolving doors, even if it's not the most perfectly researched action, it gives me a sense of regained control, and I can do stuff, and I can make decisions, and I can make a difference, and I can make progress, even if it's in something small and tiny. And, with all the things that we mentioned with the economy and with wars, like worrying about the copy on our LinkedIn post seems so trivial and dumb, but it's what we can control today. And if we made some progress, if we made some business, if we helped our employees feed their families, if we helped our customers grow their business, that matters. So I don't think it's harder today. Obviously, the tool set that we have is different. I think to an extent, the skill set that we need is different. So I'm seeing folks around my age that have been doing marketing for 20, 30 years. Some of them are definitely struggling because they find a need to adopt a new skill set now. But the kids that are just coming out of college today, they're AI native. My kids, I've got kids ages 11 through 13. They look at an image and from a mile away, they can say, oh, that's obviously AI generated. And I hear them talking like that in the car. And I'm like, well, this is a different generation.
That's just amazing.
Yeah, me and my parents are still figuring this out, right? So for them, all this AI stuff is going to be super easy. Where I think some people are finding it hard to catch on or to catch up is things that we did in the past that we considered, just like in sales, we considered it an art and a craft, and we're okay that there was almost no way to measure and improve what we were doing. A lot of these things are changing now because AI is giving us ways to improve and change them in sales and in marketing. A lot of things are showing up on dashboards today that did not show up in the past. And if you're the type of creative marketer that just wanted to try things without any measurement and just had great creative ideas, which we absolutely need. We've been talking about this for an hour. We need all these creative ideas, but they can and should be tied to better measurement today, to iterate faster and find out what's working and not working and actually measure results. That's the adaptation that we need to do now. And salespeople the same. You know, the salespeople of a previous generation that went out with a bag and thought they knew everything and just leave me alone. I've got my way. And they closed some deals. Some of them closed many good deals.
Yeah.
But today we know that we can teach and improve pretty much any salesperson if we just look at the metrics. And your metrics was you need to interrupt less, and mine is I need to talk less. We can improve these things, and we have data that shows that if we follow these instructions, we will actually get better and sell more. And so if we're not willing to do that, our employers will hire someone who is.
What about the feeling of being left behind, especially in marketing, right? Like with the disruption. I sometimes have that feeling when I go and check social, like LinkedIn, like, is my company, is my brand going to be left behind because, you know, the other guys are like trending and posting, or like my content, like, will I be left behind? Will Google algorithm, do I need to double down? Or like the other things, like, do you have that feeling sometimes? Or like, if you don't, then why, you know, how do you control it? Or did you speak to other marketers, they have that same feeling? Because I feel it's very relatable for everyone right now, especially when you have the news of like Claude Code, Anthropic is doing this, 5.4 ChatGPT is doing that. Everyone is on AI automation. Everyone is not doing any work. I'm doing 10x more. I look sometimes like, oh, I just want to close that LinkedIn and just do what I do, you know, just write a nice newsletter, basically, right? Without the anxiety of like, I need to be 10 times better, you know?
So things, I mean, it's a cliche, but of course, and it always has been, but things are really changing faster than they did, which I think gives most of us two choices. Doing the same that we were always doing in a field that's changing rapidly is probably not going to cut it and is not a winning strategy. There, you know, if you're baking bread, you can probably keep doing it the way you were doing it last week.
Right.
If you're, I was looking at I'm sure everyone's seen by now that Anthropic spiderweb chart of how different professions are being changed.
Everyone saw that.
and I looked at some deeper versions of it. You know, there's a lot of professions that are not changing, and AI is not expected to change. Number one is coroners. Coroners are not being affected by AI. Gardeners, the design part is being affected by AI, but the actual planting of seeds and trees and you know, taking care of your plants, that's not changing anytime. Coffee houses, they're not
So
changing a lot.
From white collar to blue collar.
So here's my point. Yes. One option is you adapt if you're in a game that's being changed, like B2B marketing and sales and anything that now AI has the potential to change very quickly. Your choices are either stay in the game, but that means you have to adapt quickly. And if you're looking at other players doing stuff and you're wondering like, oh, am I going to survive? Well, you should probably be doing stuff too and get into that game and adapt.
Action.
You have to take action and make sure you're staying at the top of the game because the landscape is changing very, very, very quickly. The other option, and I've seen folks do this and it's fine, is to say, you know, this game is changed and I don't like the way it's changed and it's not for me anymore. I know folks who were CROs at successful B2B companies that you've known. They're now running a golf store. They opened a laundromat. They joined their family business. They just decided this rat race is not for me anymore. They had a good run, 20, 30 years. It's changed in a way that they don't want to keep up. And I think those are valid thoughts and valid actions. And not all of us have to be in that next stage of the game. You know, we've been playing it for, in my case, many years.
Yeah.
That CRO who's running I think it's a fishing supply store or something. He's much happier now than his last 5 years in tech because he just felt like he wasn't keeping up and it wasn't for him anymore.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't mean that you always need to have that next stage, right? Like it's like I've been CRO for 15 years, so I need for the next 10 years be CRO. I cannot just be a owner of the golf.
No, I think right? Linear career paths are great for some people, and if that's how you measure your success, you've got to be sales SDR, salesperson, sales manager, VP, CRO, CEO, you go do that. If that makes you happy, just do what it takes. If at some point doesn't make you happy, we only get one chance at this life. Might as well go open the fishing store.
Yeah. This is always a question of like, or internal feeling, when you're like, can I make it? Or like, is this still what I want to do? Or rather like, do I need just to do something else? Cause like, I'm good at the other things, but I'm so close to figuring this thing out, right? And you're like, okay, I just need to do more. And that bar of figuring out always just stretching, right? So I think like even it's about more like a punching about your weight all the time, right? Like, so do you know if like with your career, with the success you've had, is there a period, or is there like a bar where you are punching about your weight, and then you're like, okay, I am in a good spot, or that bar is always going up and up and up, and you're never kind of
okay, you're opening up a whole other can of worms, but I'm happy to get into that. So when I think about what's next, I'm at a point in life that career is just one of the parameters in what's next. There's a model I love going back to that people can look up. There's a lot of writing about it. It's called the 4-burner stove model. I know some people haven't heard it, which I was surprised when I talked to people who haven't heard it.
I never heard it.
It's very helpful. So here's the 60-second version. Our life is like a 4-burner stove. One burner is for your personal, physical, and mental health. One burner is your family and close relationships. Third burner is for your career. And the fourth is for your social life and friends kind of outside that immediate circle. You can replace them if you have other big priorities, but those are what most people would consider the 4 big burners. Now, anyone who's ever cooked knows this, that if you put all 4 burners on high, you're going to run out of gas, and you're probably going to burn all the food. So at any given point, even the best cooks, they have something on high that they're watching very closely. Everything else is probably on medium and low, so they can walk away without worrying about that burning, but it's also going to take longer to cook. That's how I like to think about life. And the interesting thing is you can use that 4-burner stove model at any resolution that you can. Here's what I mean by resolution. You could look at that 4-burner stove and say, hey, this month, true story, this month, we're in March 2026, I have international travel pretty much every week of the month. And so, and it's all work related. So career is on full burner right now. Family, even physical health, is on low because I'm not seeing my family for most of the month. I'm not going to the gym nearly as often as I should. I'm not eating as healthy as I should because I usually cook at home my meals, but now I'm eating outside, which is harder to stay healthy. But this is a conscious decision. Now, I'm not stressing out about it because I know from mid-April, I'm going to be home for a while. I'm going to catch up on my gym, going to catch up on the good eating, I'm going to spend actually in April already spending time with family on vacation. So that's where I'm going to push the family burner on high. I'm going to push work on low. When I'm on vacation, I really unplug. I'm going with my family for like 10, 11 days in April. I'm not going to be working, not doing webinars, not taking calls, not doing anything. It's going to be on low. Now you could do this almost at the daily level and say, hey kids, I can't join dinner tonight because I've got to work really late. I've got this big deadline. It's the last day of the quarter, whatever your situation is, make it conscious. And that I think solves a lot of the anxiety that people have around work-life balance. I'm speaking from a very privileged position, and I want to acknowledge that and be aware of that. There are people that struggle with this a lot, but I have some control over these burners and levers, and if I'm conscious about it, again, going back to probably having a feeling of control over more things that I actually have. But I know that if some days I need to do a work dinner, even when I'm in San Francisco. I have a very high bar for missing dinner with my family. It has to be something that's very important. But when it happens, I explain it to them, and I just do it with very little guilt because I have my bar. I probably take less than one work dinner a month in San Francisco. But that one's a pretty important one. It belongs to a community I really care about, or it's
Right.
about part of my book tour, promoting my book, which my kids understand is obviously important to me, and you know, it makes me happy. So I'll go do that, and then the next night, of course, I'm going to cook dinner at home, and we're going to have family time. So I think when I'm thinking about what's next, and am I comfortable right now, or am I always pushing? I'm pretty comfortable right now because my four burners, that's why I went into this whole backstory before answering the career question. My four burners are in pretty good state right now. I go to the gym about as often as I want to. I'm eating pretty healthily. I'm spending lots of time with my kids. I know which homework they're struggling with right now. And I go to their games and I go to their concerts, and all the weekends we spend together. So I'm in a really good place right now. Now, could I take on another early stage CMO role? I could. That would mean working now longer hours again,
Yeah.
probably traveling more, less time for my family, less time for my health. I might be ready for that at some point. Maybe as the kids grow a little bit older, and in 5 years, my
Mhm.
kids are starting to go off to college. I think I might want to work harder and more in 5 years, but right now, I'm really enjoying where my burners are most of the time. And I think it's a very helpful model
It
to
is.
think about.
Yeah.
So you're not staying behind because you choose to prioritize family right now, but you know that, you know, as many people have famously said, you only get like 18 to 20 summers with your kids. That's not a lot.
That's not a lot. Yeah.
You get 18 summers with your kids. If you live in the US, in other countries like in Israel, you do
30
get to see the kids
30.
30 or 40, not because they live at home, because they're going to live nearby. So
Yeah.
in Israel,
Community.
Friday nights
Yeah.
dinner are very, very common in families, even with older kids that already have their own kids.
Yeah.
If when I was living in Israel, I saw either my parents or my in-laws every weekend. We rotated every weekend. We saw either my parents or my in-laws. So that's very common. But here in the U.S., not in the U.S. today, but where I live now in the U.S., the geography is much larger, and so a lot of people see their kids a couple of times a year for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I hope I get to see my kids more than that, but I'm not assuming I will right now. So knowing that you only have 18 summers with them has to affect other decisions like career and
Yeah.
travel and other things.
The awareness of it. Yeah. Udi, thank you so much for coming down to London, sitting down with me for the chat. Really appreciate you, man.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Guys, hope you enjoyed the interview. If you haven't liked, comment, or subscribed to Belkins podcast, I would appreciate if you do that. It's just gonna help me a lot to get even better guests and interview them on your behalf. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all in the next interview.